We all know how landscapes can determine the identity of a place. And here in Missouri, this is a landscape that I can pretty much say that everybody feels pretty great about. This is a landscape that people in Missouri don't necessarily feel so great about. Missouri has 5 times more billboards than the national average, and people have, let's just say, complicated feelings about the way that signage dominates and defines our landscape, especially along the interstate. Now, one way to engage a complicated landscape is through a public art project. An art project can invite people to look differently at their surroundings. It has the potential to start a conversation and sometimes rally community around a new way of looking at something that's iconic in the landscape. So, with that in mind, a year ago, I started a project called the I-70 Sign Show, and we install a conceptual art piece on I-70 billboards. This is a work of art by the conceptual artist Mel Bachner. A new artwork goes up every 2 months, and then after 2 months, it moves to a different location on the interstate. The project is funded by the University of Missouri. We have corporate support from DDI Media, and I run a tutorial of 5 journalism school honor students who help me run every facet of this project. So what this does is it takes Missouri's billboard surplus, because there are lots of blank billboards because there are so many billboards, and it treats them the same way that you would treat the blank walls of the white cube that you find in an art museum or a gallery. But it also gives us an opportunity to engage the dialogue of existing messages. The artworks that we choose somehow comment on one theme that's prevalent along the interstate. Now, these would include food, entertainment, education, religion, sex, and also politics, and often these messages are in conflict with each other. And because Missouri is also known as being sort of ground zero or a center for red state, blue state values and conflicts between those, we launched the project with this art image by Kay Rosen. Now, here comes the digital part. We have a website, and the website is essential to the project because it documents the project. It includes images of artworks and the artworks' locations and where they are. And it also includes a database of existing billboards. My students and I, over the past year, we are photographing all of the physical billboards between St. Louis and Kansas City. So the database is essential because it helps people who don't live in Missouri understand how radical it is to insert artworks into this context. Now, as a teaching tool, doing this has a precedent in this famous project that happened when Yale professors from the architecture school took their students to Vegas on a class trip, and they looked at the relationship between signage, architecture, and car culture. What we're doing is a digital update of that because we work with smartphones. We use smartphones to take the pictures, and we do GPS grabs, and that allows us to have on the database this map of all billboards. Now, this is the map today. There are 311 billboards up there, and this is about 2/3 of, I'm just estimating that there are between 500 and 600 billboards on the interstate, maybe more. Now, when you go to the billboard database, you get a photograph of the billboard, and when we photograph the billboards, we don't just drive by in a car and shoot the billboard out the window, right? We go and we get as physically close to the billboards as possible, standing frontally to take a square picture, a rectangular picture, and get the GPS grab. And I'll just say that being this close to a billboard is really strange. And the thing that's great about doing this with students is we get a completely different perspective on the interstate landscape and look at the strange places where these signs happen to be, which, believe me, they're weird. The other thing that we're doing is we're categorizing the billboards. We're deciding what categories each billboard belongs in. Now, for example, food. If you go to the database and type in food, you'll get all kinds of billboards that are about food, ranging from Applebee's to like Amish fudge stands. Now here, Nose for Nyack, one of my favorites, it is about plastic surgery and self-improvement. But the students help me decide what the categories are, and the categories are not always clear. And here's where classroom conversation gets really interesting. How do we separate what we associate with the sign from what the sign is actually telling us. Now, this is definitely about politics. We know this because it's sponsored by a PAC. But is it about religion? This sign is definitely about religion, but is it also about politics? Can we make that judgment? Is this about women's health? It says love your babies, and it offers help, but the word woman is not on this sign anyplace. So we break it down and talk about what the signs are actually telling us. And sometimes the art gets complicated. This is an image by the artist Micheline Thomas. I invited her to participate in the project because her work comments on representations of the female body in art history and in popular culture. So she was picked to deal with sexuality and representations of the female body, and sex is all over the interstate. And this comment was pretty clear in her artwork's first location behind this ad for Strip Club, which is here in town in Columbia. It's on the business loop, Club Vogue. So the meaning of Micheline's artwork got very, very complicated, however, when it moved to its second site. Now, when the art moves to a second site, DDI Media selects the billboard based on what billboards are empty and what's available. And what happened to be available was a billboard at the West Florissant exit. So this billboard moved in December, right after the grand jury decided not to indict Dennis Wilson, right? Dennis Wilson? And Darren Wilson. And so the artwork's potential meaning suddenly shifted from gender politics to race politics in a pretty profound way. So with my students, we had to have an ethical conversation about whether or not we had a responsibility to engage with the public about this particular billboard in a way that we hadn't with any of the other artworks. And ultimately, we decided to let the work speak for itself, but we reached out to arts organizations in St. Louis so that they could let their communities know that this billboard was there. Now, the billboard initially, or the billboard project, the sign show, initially was just planned for 1 year. Because so many interesting things have come out of it in terms of community engagement and teaching, it's going to be continued for at least another 6 months or to the end of this year. And my hope is that we continue it into the national elections so that the art can engage the heightened rhetoric that's going to inevitably come up on the billboards in the state. So when we enter this new phase, what we'll do is put the hashtag for the show on the billboard so we can have more citizens engagement with the project so people can communicate with us. And the project already has a Twitter feed, it has Facebook, it's on Instagram. So social media is important to us. However, I want to say that my students and I talk a lot about something that's become really apparent to us in the course of looking closely at billboards. When you're online on Facebook, we increasingly see information and ideas and opinions that are tailored to suit our tastes and values. We see things that we already like or that algorithms are figuring out that we like, for example, we just bought a board game for our daughter and I like mid-century modern design. So there I'm getting ads for that, and there's my friend's cat. There's always the cat. So what we figured out, or what I've noticed and find really, really interesting and provocative, is that when you're in the car driving down the interstate, it's possibly one of the last places that you actually are forced to look at something that you don't necessarily agree with, that doesn't conform to your tastes and your values and things that you like. So, is the supposedly dying media of outdoor advertising actually a really provocative and exciting and radical place to think about presenting free speech and ideas connected to democracy? I don't know. It's something that we'll be thinking about as the project develops, but while we're all thinking about, please follow the project on Instagram and on Twitter, and that's the website.